Hello again, boys and girls. It's Morales with our Chapter 32.3 review, Chinese Empire Under Siege. So basically, China being cut up by the Europeans and taken over. Here we go. Objectives, pretty simple. Understand how and why China fell. Understand the issues China faced and efforts to reform, and understand the influence that Europe had on China. That Europe had on China is a big deal here. Chinese restrictions on British trade. So 1759 pulls around. British are starting to be the up-and-comers, and China is starting to slide. The Europeans' presence, for the most part, is only limited to the trade port of Guangzhou in the south. Remember that they controlled the trade and only limited it to these places. Okay. Foreigners deal with these groups of people called Kohangs. Kohangs are good to be if you're in China, because you can kind of control trade. At this point, China still doesn't need European trade. The only thing that they find in value from the Europeans is silver. Okay, so this brings in our Latin America connection, or our America's connection. Silver, Manila trade ships, all that good stuff. Silver is what they want. There's nothing really that the Europeans have that's super valuable. But then, Britain and the other European places are going to industrialize and become more important. So some people in Britain come up with this ingenious idea. In fact, it's the British East India Company, which is controlling India, which is really of Central Asia. They come up with this thing called opium, and they become the biggest drug pusher in the world. And they start selling opium to China, which has this massive population who get addicted on opium. So Brits are the big drug pusher, and they start selling the opium into China for silver. And so now the Brits are getting their silver back from the Chinese, who only demanded silver, and it's the Chinese who start to lose the trade war. Before they realize it, the British have the upper hand in the situation, and China is sliding very quickly down. Okay, the opium trade, it's illegal. China bans it early on. The Britons kind of frown upon it. They kind of look the other way as the British East India Company does it. But it's going to be about 10% of the trade volume that that England does throughout the world. So they know about it, but they continue to do it. After all, they're just selling it to China. That's their perception. So opium, it's a school vegetable that they use in lunches. It's not. That's a lie. But it creates a whole bunch of issues. Number one, it's an opiate, it's very addictive, and it hooks up all these people on opium so much so that they can't do anything but want opium. Okay. The Chinese move to enforce the ban. They bring in this one guy, who'll come up later, to try to keep it from spreading, and then his efforts are going to be poorly viewed upon by the British, so much so that they start a war. So this guy named Lin Zizou is the guy that wants to ban it, and he's very effective at banning it, and stops it for a little while in certain parts and cuts down the trade. But then the British get very upset because they're messing up their trade, and they start this thing called the Opium Trade Wars, the Opium Wars. Okay, and then this is when the British whoop up on the Chinese and essentially destroy them. It's a 3-year-long war, but they weren't fighting the whole time. And then the British really whip them up when they go into the Grand Canal and start to destroy some of the inland towns in China. And this gives the idea to other groups that, hey, look, you could take your modern ship with its steam engine and go upstream and start to attack some of these places that thought they were free from attack because they were upriver. Not anymore. With the new modern ships, you can do it. So it gives other Europeans a clue or the idea to start to develop these types of ships. The short story comes in. The British control them and force the Chinese to settle and make trade agreements that are very beneficial to Europe or to the Brits, and not beneficial to the Chinese. Kind of similar to capitulations. Okay, these unequal treaties, China's forced to sign the treaties, or else they're going to get crushed, and they set up certain things. The most popular one is the Treaty of Nanjing, which ends the Opium War, but also establishes Great Britain as the preeminent group in China, the one with the most power. It gives them Hong Kong for an indefinite period of time. Later on, they're going to give it back to China in 1999. It's a big deal. Okay, but this opens up more ports to British trade. I think they get 3 ports out of this, and then also gives extraterritoriality status to the British subjects. That's the thing we talked about, where British subjects, British citizens follow British rules even though they're in China. Other countries see that, they want the same thing, so they push for certain advantage or special treaties and also extraterritoriality, and pretty soon China is being overwhelmed by the European forces and no longer able to control themselves. So very quickly China slips from being a world power, one of the dominant groups, to a paper dragon, to a group that's being crushed by the Europeans or Western civilization. So here's the spheres of influence. If you take a look at it, look at the key on the right, and look at all the different groups who are involved in essentially acquiring territories or taking possession parts of China, and it's how it's going to be carved up, kind of like a pie, hint, hint. And then also on the top left, look at all the rebellion. Things are going bad in China. How these guys even held China together is kind of amazing. They have all these things being parceled out, and the rebellion. It's amazing that China even stood around for such a long time during this turmoil. So the Taiping Rebellion is one of many rebellions that take place in China, but it's the more popular one, a more influential, in that it gets a lot of followers. And this is the opening story of the guy who's a teacher. Be cautious of teachers, they're crazy. Who starts a rebellion, and at one point he has 1 million people and he's taken possession of a couple cities. So as the population rises and the situation for the mass amount of people stays very bad or bleak, they're unable to feed themselves, a couple bad harvests, and they're in starvation. They're eating random things, including going cannibalistic in some places because the situation is so bad. They're desperate people. Desperate people do crazy things, like we said before. And then throughout China, there's going to be large-scale rebellions in the late 19th century, so in the late 1800s, and this is purely a result of the terrible poverty that many of the peasants are in. They're very, very unhappy. Then we have other rebellions like the Nian Rebellion, the Muslim Rebellion, the Tungan Rebellions. These are all examples, but it's the Taiping Rebellion that's the most widespread and the one that's closest to toppling the Manchu dynasty. Okay, remember, this is the Manchu that control China. They came in. So it's read by Hong Quan. Not sure if I'm saying that right, probably not. But he's the teacher guy who goes a little bit wacko, and then thinks he sees, or has a dream with Christ, and he's Christ's brother, and he comes back, gets all this going, and eventually, for some strange reason, has 1 million followers, and they take over parts of China. So what they wanted, they are not divers. They didn't go to the Olympics. That's another little fib that I'm telling. Okay, let's see if you guys catch it in class. But they want to abolish private property. Now think about these things. Please think right now. Okay, they want to abolish private property. They want to create communal wealth. Okay, things that everyone owns together, and they want to prohibit both foot binding and concubinage. Okay, they also want to offer free public education, simplification can't say that, of the Chinese written language, and then mass literacy for the people. Okay, who would be against it? Oh, let's see, massive changes, social changes, and economic changes. So not only will the Qing dynasty be against it, but also people who have wealth will be against it. So early on, the Qing dynasty, the Manchus are not getting much help in suppressing these guys, but as soon as this Taiping Rebellion gets popular and other people see it as a threat to their status, that's when they're finally going to get help. Okay. They also prohibited sexual relationships among their followers, including married couples, but the teacher guy, he didn't really adhere to that. In fact, he had his own large harem of entertainment. The Taiping defeat, once again, they took over several cities, including Nanjing, and made a capital in Nanjing, and that was controlled for quite a while by them. And then they attacked Beijing and almost take it over, but just couldn't get it done. Had they done that, it probably would have been in the end of the Qing dynasty, and it would have been the start of the Taiping dynasty. The Imperial Army finally able to get theirs to act together, and then with the help of both Chinese warlord type peoples and some European/American technology and weapons. They're able to defeat the Taipings. The Han guy, the teacher guy, commits suicide because he doesn't want to get caught, but he's already been out of the picture for the most part. And then they capture Nanjing, and then they beat the snot out of the Taipings that they do capture. They're the guys that you see pictured on the walls, their heads chopped off and stuff like that. Typical situation. Don't do this, or else we'll chop your head off, which apparently is not too comfortable. The self-strengthening movement now comes in, and this is a kind of reform effort. Okay? These are people who want to do what they look at the second line. Chinese learning at the base, Western learning for use. So they wanted to keep the Chinese ideas, concept, Confucian ideas in the root, but they want to develop quickly into the Western model. Okay, so they're going to blend some of the Chinese culture with industrial technology from the Europeans. They start to build shipyards, railroads, in schools, in particular schools that encourage science and those type of things. This starts to get going very quickly, very fast, but it's very, very limited. And so it doesn't produce enough of the infrastructure that's needed for the industries and for businesses to succeed. And then during this time, we have the Empress Dowager Shiji, who's a very interesting character. She's the favorite concubine of the emperor, ends up taking over as regent for her son, and then kills everyone around them, and then runs the business for her son. But everyone, her son's the emperor, but everyone knows that she's really the one in charge. And she's diverting some of the money that's intended to build the infrastructure and stuff. So she builds herself a very fancy palace and fancy boat made out of marble. A boat made out of marble. This opens up the influence opens up China for more European partition. So if you take a look at the picture, there's China. It's I think, what is that, a pizza pie? Something like that. And you see the European groups all trying to take it apart, trying to take over their area. So these are the spheres of influence that we're talking about, where China, that used to be big and powerful, is starting to lose some of its territories, some of its tributary states. They don't control them. They lose Vietnam, they lose Burma, they lose Korea and Taiwan, and so they're no longer in possession of those areas that brought in wealth to their empire. And then China itself is going to be split up into spheres of influence. Not the entire thing, but chunks that are going to be controlled by the Europeans. Once again, they don't have the power. The Chinese don't have the power. The Europeans are running the show. So this is very similar to what happened in the Ottoman Empire with the extraterritoriality and capitulation ideas. The 100 Days Reform is another reform effort, okay, and it lasts a little over 100 days. Big deal. Okay, don't get too technical on this. It's led by this guy named Yu Wei and Kui Chao. And they're two guys that travel abroad and come back with some ideas, and they're trying to bring this to China very quickly to get them up to speed. They've seen what's going on, and they know that they don't become more European-like, China's going to end. They interpreted Confucianism to allow for radical change to the system. In other words, they wanted to use the Confucian ideas to bring quick change, and they're very pro-industrialization. The Emperor Guangzhou is the guy that tries to do these things, okay? And then he's trying to get this going so that they change quickly so that China doesn't fall apart. Empress Dowager finds out about these things, and she comes back and then tells Guangzhou, who is her regent's son, knock it off, and she takes power again and cancels the reform movements. So once again, a short-lived attempt to try to bring them up to speed. It doesn't take place. This leads to the Boxer Rebellion, okay, and which is kind of the reprisal for this. The Boxer are a group of people known as the Society for the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. What a cool name. Anyways, they don't like foreigners. They hate foreigners. And so they go around kind of through where the foreigners are hanging out, and they start attacking them. And they get a lot of people in China kind of behind them, supporting them. And Shiji, the Empress Dowager, supports them kind of secretly, but not too secretly. People know about it. Eventually, the Europeans whoop up on them with a coalition led by Japanese, British, Americans are in there, French are in there, and they beat the snot out of these Boxers. And then they take a whole bunch of them, and they chop off their heads, stick them on the wall, because that's a fun thing to do. And then here's the Taoist Empress. Check out her fingernails. Those are awesome. Okay. Anyway, she's the one that was running the